Great. Thanks, Ali.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Morning, everyone. Very happy to be with you this morning, and just thanks to everyone for joining us, and welcome to today's discussion. This is the last event of this year's series of Rural Ideas Fora, hosted by the department, where we invite people to come together and discuss some of the key challenges and opportunities facing rural communities. These events are an important element in our ongoing engagement with rural stakeholders and citizens under the government's rural development policy or rural future. This is a hugely ambitious plan for rural Ireland, and one which is already having a positive impact in communities, towns and villages across the country. But while we deliver on the commitments contained in our rural future between now and 2025, it's very important that we continue to be open and to add value to the policy through the discussions like these today, which will see the exchange of ideas and inform further policy considerations and programme developments that will help tackle the challenges we face in making rural Ireland a better place to live. Today, we are focused on how we can achieve a socially inclusive rural Ireland. And as someone from a rural background myself and my own professional background, I'm particularly interested in hearing new ideas as to how we can work to improve the lives of those living in rural areas who might be experiencing difficulties. I have a number of relevant areas of responsibility in two government departments that I'll touch on briefly. As you might know, I've got responsibility for the department's SICAP programme. It's the government's main social inclusion programme. And the aim of SICAP is to provide supports to individuals and communities who are experiencing disadvantage, enable them move closer to mainstream services and become more involved and included in society. SICAP is overseen by the LCDCs, and services are delivered locally by the local development companies. I've visited a few, to say the least, local development companies over the last year, and have very much seen the impact on the ground of SICAP, and also the passion and enthusiasm of SICAP workers to ensure that no one is left behind. And also, while on these visits, I've seen how local development companies, with the support of local authorities, have been very innovative in tackling issues unique to their areas. And I'm going to give a few examples. In rural North Mayo, for example, we support the David Museum, which has become a real focal point for the community of Straight, and as a centre where Michael David's message of equality and inclusion is fostered and grown. In Castle Island, I was struck by the traveller-led revamped furniture recycling project, which I think is a model that can be replicated to great benefit across the country. The green regeneration plans for Fiesta Hall in Kilcormac and Offaly were ones, again, I think that can be replicated throughout the Midlands in particular. In Leitrim, the Drumsna Resource Centre stands out to me in terms of the links that the workers there go to and the volunteers to ensure that older people, often in isolated situations, are included and feel part of the community there. In RD, the D Hub is a great example of a community pooling resources and collaborative approaches to develop a really valuable youth and community space in a rural town. And again, various programmes and community efforts that were coordinated and pulled together to develop the new Balladreen Childcare Centre in Roscommon as well were ones that stand out to me. Elsewhere, I've seen friendly call services, folklore projects, social enterprises, restorative agriculture projects and social farming, and many other innovations which bring people together in rural settings and provide welcoming spaces for people who may not have felt connected to their communities beforehand. My commitment to social inclusion, I believe, was reflected in last year's 10% increase in the SICAP budget, which is the biggest increase the programme has seen. And during this year, in response to the Ukraine crisis, I secured a further £5 million for the programme to strengthen the capacity of the local development companies in responding to the arrival of Ukrainians. Further core increases to SICAP have been secured for 2023, along with a €10 million package for Ukraine work. So SICAP is working. We've seen great results, but we are also conducting a piece of work that is trying to draw out how SICAP as a programme helps to release other resources and programmes and allows communities to access other non-SICAP resources that they would not otherwise have been able to do. As we prepare for the next iteration of SICAP that will begin in 2024, we want to make sure it's an even better programme and will provide supports to those who need them most. So while many of you attending today have fed into the consultation process in reviewing the current programme and providing feedback on where SICAP can improve, I'd be very interested today to hear of any further ideas that might emerge that we can take on board. Of course, there are many other programmes besides SICAP that contribute to social inclusion in rural settings. Leader obviously is one of them, supports for men's sheds, and various capital funding streams that also assist, such as Town and Village, the Rural Regeneration and Development Fund, and the investment in remote working facilities. And we have been exploring ways that our remote working infrastructure could be used for youth work in evenings as well, thus potentially opening a hugely needed and valuable resource for rural young people. The new Empowering Communities programme is taking a focused community development approach to tackling area-based social exclusion to a number of small rural communities located in Mullingar, Athy, Longford, Ballinasloe, Ballina, Arranmore and Bunclody. And when we're discussing ideas today, I think it's important to be conscious and acknowledge the work and potential of other groups and structures, such as our public participation networks, our volunteer centres, but also what we've managed to achieve when we collaborate and come together in the face of huge challenges, with the Community Response Fora during the pandemic and now the local Ukraine Response Fora as well. And of course, the work to make rural communities more inclusive doesn't stop at the Department of Rural and Community Development. Broadband reach is slowly but steadily reaching further into rural Ireland. There has been a significant start, I think, to large-scale investment in walking and cycling infrastructure, and I do believe that this will help to prevent and tackle some elements of rural isolation and exclusion. But the big key action, I think, in this mobility transport area is enhanced rural public transport. And if you'll pardon the pun, there is a distance to go here, but real improvement is happening in this regard. I think the reduction in public transport fares is having a positive impact in terms of inclusion, and more routes and more frequent services are being added across the country to help rural Ireland become more interconnected. And this will continue and grow as the NTA Connecting Ireland plan is rolled out in the coming years. The local link companies across the country, I think, deserve special mention, I think, in terms of their role in tackling and preventing social exclusion at a rural level. And I think they have a growing role to play going forward in addressing rural isolation. Local Link in Kerry, for example, provides a service to over 90 towns and villages in the county. It was a statistic that stood out for me this year in terms of the reach of Local Link services. Now, the frequency of those services does need to grow. And there are some really good examples as well of community car initiatives around the country as well. And I think there's real potential for a very important role for the community car model to grow. And it's certainly an initiative I'd like to see more of and have been pushing the model with the NTA and others as well. In my other Department of Social Protection, we are supporting some key initiatives that are doing huge work in terms of social inclusion in rural areas. Community Employment and TUS are doing huge work in this regard in both rural and urban settings across the country, but it's the Rural Social Scheme that is especially relevant to today's discussion. The RSS is one of the most powerful inclusion tools we have that makes a hugely important link between small farmers and fishers, often living in the most marginal land in the country, and the community that they live in. And I wanted to highlight its impact today, but also to flag that we will be starting a process of review on how to improve the Rural Social Scheme, and we'll be very interested in hearing from a wide range of voices on how we can refresh the RSS to support and prepare farming and fishing communities for the challenges and opportunities ahead. More broadly speaking, in my role in the Department of Social Protection, I oversee the implementation of the roadmap for social inclusion, and we are currently in the process of conducting mid-term review of that plan. So no doubt you'll have your own thoughts and ideas on what socially inclusive rural Ireland looks like and how we can get there and need to get there. So I'm primarily here to listen this morning, and I'll be with you for most, if not all, of the session. We have a panel discussion as well with Justin Salmon, Eamon O'Reilly and Maria Malloy, but I'll hand it back to Ali to roll us on to the next stage. Thanks everyone, looking forward to the discussion and the inputs this morning.
Great, thank you, Minister, and thank you for opening this discussion this morning for us, and glad that you will be with us as the conversation continues. So moving on, I'd now like to introduce another leader who's really going to be sharing the opening remarks as we begin our forum this morning, which is Paul Garrity, who is the Principal Officer for Social Inclusion and Communities Unit in the department. And that includes policy and oversight for a number of measures that really support disadvantaged communities, including SICAP, which we've just heard of from the Minister, and the Community Development Pilot Programme, Community Enhancement Programme, Community Centres Investment Fund. So without further ado, I will just bring you up onto the screen, Paul, and it'd be great for you to really lead us in our discussions this morning. So let me just find you here, and I'll bring you up onto the screen. Actually, I'll just check. Perhaps, Paul, would you mind just saying something so I can, oh, here we are, I can see you there. So here we are, Paul, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Ali. Thanks, Minister Gareth and team. Good morning to everybody. Great to see all the familiar faces and a lot of new faces here this morning. So as Ali said, I'm Paul Garrity from the Social Inclusion Communities Unit in the department with responsibility for Social Inclusion Community Activation Programme, or SICAP as it's known, among other things. So look, just a very few brief words from me to hopefully sort of maybe generate some ideas for the discussion, but very brief, as it's important, I think, to get to the discussion stage quickly and give that the time it deserves. So, you know, the theme of the event, socially inclusive rural Ireland, we know there are issues affecting rural communities that are unique to the rural setting. And I guess we know that each rural setting is unique in itself and different. And there's not much we can tell you that you don't know already. However, as we design the next iteration of SICAP, I'm really keen, and we in the team are really keen to hear your ideas today so that we can set about tackling those issues insofar as we can via the SICAP programme. So it's really a good time to hear hopefully what are new and innovative approaches to tackling rural isolation and exclusion. So I guess, and the Minister had mentioned a lot of the key points here, we need to identify the barriers, and we know most of them facing disadvantaged individuals and communities that prevent them being a part of a socially inclusive rural Ireland. And look, it's great to have Eamon, Maria and Justin here today to hear their experiences, and they'll talk about their daily efforts in combating rural isolation. And they all have different and really novel approaches. And maybe some of those approaches can be taken on board by some of the rest of us here today. And we can take the ideas back to our own organisations and communities. Look, I'm going to throw out a few points in no particular order. And hopefully we might be able to touch on them, some of them in more depth during the discussions, the panel discussions or the breakout rooms. So, from a social point of view, I'd be really interested in hearing your ideas today as how we might encourage people in the rural setting to join community organisations. What does that mean? Do we need to have a campaign? We need to use social media a bit better. Newsletters, parish newsletters, how do we reach people? What about the potential use, for example, as is happening in England, of rural pubs that are closed as community spaces and hubs? And I know there's some developments in that area already. Community alert groups, elderly visits. I mean, there's some fantastic initiatives in Cork. We know the Friendly Call service, which won an award recently, which is a fantastic service for reaching out for people, mostly, to be fair, in urban Cork, but I think it's transferable to the rural setting. There's the big issue of carers that we're not going to solve today, but their availability and how they're funded, which enables people to, live longer in their own homes and communities. We can't not have that as part of the discussion. I suggest that we might talk a little bit about the use of the local library. There's 330 library branches in Ireland. Are we using them as community hubs properly? Are they, fulfilling their potential in each of the communities? I don't think so. I think that's worth a chat. And Minister mentioned improved broadband connectivity, and we have hubs now popping up in small towns and villages, enabling people both to work remotely, but is there a social benefit there too? I think there is. We can't not talk about infrastructural development, even though we don't have the policy responsibility. We have to figure out how we integrate all our ideas into the bigger space, into the housing space and the infrastructural space as well, and regional development. The promotion of renewable energy, sustainable tourism, all of that, how does that link into a more socially inclusive rural Ireland? Restorative agriculture, green blue initiatives. For example, we recently funded a community development project in Youghal, where community development workers are delivering green initiatives in coastal communities. Combating isolation, the transport services that the Minister mentioned, the community car service, and I think thinking is moving on in a really, really positive way there. So oftentimes it's about the simple solution of getting around and getting people around. Farmers markets, what are the social events that people can go to? And in the cultural and tourism space, which Justin I know is going to talk about a little bit, festivals, music events, walking events and so on, museums and folklore as a way to sort of promote inclusion, walkways, cycle tracks, the Minister mentioned. So look, that's a bit of a scattergun. I threw out a few ideas, and hopefully that would serve to prompt a bit of discussion during the discussion stage and the panel stage. So look, as we design the next iteration of SICAP, we'd love to have a few new ideas coming from you today. This is a really, really important gathering as far as I'm concerned. We're absolutely here to listen and we are absolutely determined to reflect any good, workable, innovative ideas in the next iteration of SICAP. So hopefully you'll see it coming back at you if we can come up with it and tease it through today. So let's make it work, and let's make it affect the policy in a positive way. And thanks very much for having us. Look forward to the discussions. I think I'll speak a little bit for a couple of minutes at the end to wrap up and see if we can capture some of the thinking from today. So listen, thanks very much. I'll keep it short and sweet. I'll hand you back to Ali.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. I mean, I'm just really getting the range of what's possible, what's already been done, but what more is possible. I really appreciated that, you know, that our social inclusion is made up of so many parts that all influence, particularly when we're living in a rural area. So I think that will have really prompted the discussion, and will hopefully feed into the panel discussion that we're going to be listening to next. I'll be part of it. And for the rest of you can really follow and hear more from hear from our guests that we've heard about are here with us today. So I would like to introduce those guests. Some of you may know, different colleagues and contributors are here, and some of you may not. So I'm going to give a little introduction to each one, and then we will get into our conversation. So first of all, just to introduce Justin Salmon, and maybe I'll just bring you up on the screen right now, Justin. So Justin is the CEO of Mayo Northeast Leader Partnership Company, and you've been involved in rural development for over 30 years, established cooperatives around rural Ireland. And I know, as Paul was just saying, you have a particular connection to aspects such as Irish language, culture and folklore, and had a very leading role in the Michael Davitt Museum that the ministers talked about as well. And I'm sure have done many more things in your work. So Justin, thanks so much for being with us today. And then I'll move on to our next contributor on the panel, which is Maria Malloy. Maria is the vice chair on the board of MUCH LGTB+ in Galway. And so I know you're based in Galway City, and really have an aim to reflect the diversity within the LGBT+ community, and have a real focus on participation. And I'm really sort of looking forward to hearing more about kind of how that's been going, what the challenges are, and what you are looking to be doing in the coming times. So Maria, it's been great to start to meet you as we prepared for this forum, and looking forward to our discussion together. And then finally, we have with us Eamon O'Reilly. So Eamon is the CEO of the North East and West Kerry Development, which is another community-led local development partnership. And I know you run national programs and EU programs, and obviously with SICAP, which we've heard about, Leader. And I think you also have additional programs, and it'd be interesting to sort of hear what some of those are, some other complementary approaches that you run. So Eamon, also been great to meet you, and looking forward to our conversation. A really warm welcome to all three of you, and looking forward to moving into this conversation, which we'll be doing now for the next perhaps 30-40 minutes. We'll just have a chance to kind of discuss together and start to dig into some of those questions that or those areas that Paul was kind of outlining for us. So if you would allow, and just do remember you can either come off mute now or just come off mute before you speak. Either way, whatever is going to kind of flow best for you. If you're in a quiet environment, you could just be off mute. It's up to you. So I will launch into a question to kick us off. And maybe this is one question that just each of you could respond in turn, and have a chance to sort of bring your voice into this. So what would you say are the kind of the particular issues, the unique issues that are facing rural areas in terms of building social cohesion and inclusive communities? So what's unique to doing the social inclusion work rurally? And maybe yes, Justin, I'll start with you. Over to you first. And just to invite you to come off mute. I'll just send you a little message to come off mute, Justin. Yeah. Justin? Just a little reminder to come off mute. I'm on tenterhooks now. I'm looking forward to hearing. I hope you'll repeat everything you said.
Hello,
Great.
yeah, right.
So, Justin, over to you. Give us your perspective on that.
I think that for a long time that the social inclusion dimensions of rural areas have been kind of not necessarily ignored, but that is emphasized because we are inclined to use urban models to sort out rural areas. And there are spatial issues in rural areas and issues of immigration. And I think that one of the great poverties of rural Ireland is the cultural erosion, where we have been divorced from our language, divorced from our countryside, and we need to readjust that. And a few examples of it, we use cultural animation approach as a model of development, where we try to create a nexus between landscape and people and community. And examples of that are the folklore project that was mentioned. This is an initiative that we carried out during COVID, which provided great mental health support to people. 135 people were interviewed over the phone and by Zoom. And we didn't ask them what was wrong with them. We didn't ask them, do they need their medicine? We asked them, we said, we heard you have great stories to tell. And therefore, they became very involved in the community side of things. Mm. We're also going to extend this now to national schools, who will, 3 national schools in Erris in particular, one in Achill, will, the older kids will be going out to meet the elderly in the community. Therefore, you're creating a contact between elderly and youth.
Mm-hmm. And Justin, just to check with you, so just start staying on this first question, you talked about the cultural erosion that is there. Is that, I mean, is that happening more in a rural area, or is it the fact that in urban areas people were well fed in terms of culture? You know, there's many cultural areas one can go to, whereas there's less in rural areas. So any of this erosion that's maybe happening across the country is keenly felt.
It is, but it's like what happened to travellers in the 60s when the plastics and all that came in. The basis of their culture of making things was destroyed overnight, and therefore you get a dispossessed sort of people. The same has happened down the years in rural areas, and you take the examples of islands and the Veltets, where the lack of population and the lack of leadership have left these people isolated. And now in the post-COVID situation, it's interesting that people are trying to move back. So it's an opportunity to revive some of those key things in the areas and reinterpret landscape. Mm-hmm. And one of the examples of that is we're developing a project we started in Achill called the Anthropology of Food, where a landscape dictates the food you have, and that creates the community. So we're involved with that with the Maynooth University and UCD. Mm-hmm. We try to bring in universities to help us in all those programs, because there's a dearth of leadership sometimes in rural areas due to migration, and we need the intellectual rigor of universities. In the folklore department, for instance, we have George Mason University in America in Virginia, and the professor has seconded herself to Mayo Northeast for this year to work with us on developing folklore and getting American students to even talk to the elderly in Achill and Mayo. And
so Justin, just to say, it would be great. I just want to say that part of the direction we're going to go in this conversation is to sort of go into some of these innovative projects and how they work. But what I'd like to do in this first part is just kind of really identify what's the context. What is this unique context that I know you know very well, and in each of our leaders here does. So I'm just going to pause you there, and I'm going to turn to each of our the others of us, just to start building this picture. And I'm sure it's known very well to many of us gathered in this fora, but it's still a conversation worth having, and it sets the scene for all the work that each of you are doing. So Maria, turning to you, what would you say, what would you sort of bring to this or add to this in terms of what's so particular about the rural context in terms of the need to build social cohesion and inclusive communities?
Thanks, Ali. And Justin started us off with great food for thought. But I suppose in the context, I'll be wearing my LGBT plus hat and rural isolation in relation to this. And I suppose Ireland is a country, and socially we've come on leaps and bounds. And obviously, you know, the milestones of the marriage equality referendum and the Gender Recognition Act show how much we've come on, you know, in relation to the LGBT plus community. But I suppose there's still a way to go, and we see through the work that we do based in Galway City that, you know, we still have members of the LGBT plus community that are in rural settings that have a fear of not being accepted. The isolation comes from which they can't, you know, comfortably be their whole self in the place they live. And we've had a lot of people, when we had Shock Solace, our LGBT resource centre, open, that would use the public transport. They'd get on a bus, they'd get on a train for several hours. They'd come from Munster, Leinster and parts of Connacht. We were quite well located beside Kent Station, so we were very accessible. And we had people that probably for the first time in their lives, we had an 80-year-old farmer to come in and say that I'm part of this community and I finally feel belonged. So we anecdotally, you know, were there for people and heard their stories, and they felt that they could be their whole self with us. But when they got back on that bus, they went back into the closet. So that's the aspect from that we wish to tackle. And as I said, much has been done in a positive progress for our society. We see that through the rural prides that are popping up throughout the country. But I really feel that more needs to be done in relation to our LGBT plus community within the rural setting.
Wow, thank you for just really bringing that to life. So it's almost, so in the typically or today in the rural setting, it can be, it's more contained, it's more mono, there's more of a, whatever is the dominant culture, it's singular. And so let's say for an LGBT plus person, if that's not in the culture, which it probably isn't in the rural setting, they really cannot feel safe to belong or show themselves even. Wow. Okay, and just great to know of your centre sitting there in Galway City, but it still sounds like there's a lot of work to do. So moving on to Eamon, what would you say to that? Just what's unique in particular about the rural setting for social cohesion? And just to invite you to come off mute. Yeah.
Thanks, Ali, and thanks for the invitation. I suppose for me, Ali, it's helpful to look at social inclusion under 4 sort of pillars. One is income, and that was mentioned already, I think, by Minister O'Brien there with the RSS. But whether it's paid employment or scheme or social welfare, you know, it's I think that's important that people have an income. And in many rural areas, the disposable income that's available to people is some of the lowest levels. I think Donegal, Mayo, Kerry, if I'm not wrong, are, you know, they're poor. And in terms of attracting people back, they're the lowest. I think Kerry is probably 3rd lowest. The second item we look at then is a contribution that people, you know, whether it's in paid employment or a volunteer, or as I think Paul mentioned earlier, as a carer, that they're making a contribution to society. And Justin, I suppose, you know, hit the nail on the head there in relation to those older people giving something back. They weren't asked, you know, what do you want? They were saying, you have a story to tell. And that's a contribution back to the rest of us to help our culture. So people giving, I think the issue there in rural Ireland, and again, the Minister mentioned earlier about transport, the lack of transport, even if we have the jobs or the employment or the education, and it is certainly improving. I'm delighted you mentioned local links, because again, local development companies would have been at the start of that and then stepped back. I suppose the issue with income, the first point there is the lack of quality employment as well in our area to up that disposable income, you know. The third pillar that I look at is support, and Maria there talked about it, the network of support that people feel, whether it's their family, you know, whether it's the community itself, or whether it's people of like mind or like issues, that I think is important. And I think the issue here really is the lack of resources, if people don't mind me saying it, in community development since the recession. We haven't really got back to, you know, meeting people where they're at as a community, as individuals, as families, whatever it is, and giving them the time to talk to them and see what are their issues. And I suppose that the fourth point then is again related to that lack of, I suppose, of resources, is decision making, that people can make decisions for themselves. So I think it's useful to look under those income, and obviously in rural Ireland, that's an issue for people. The contributions to society, and I picked the issue of transport, but I'm sure other people, that support that people need, and sometimes without migration and lack of job opportunities, that support isn't there for people. And then the ability to make decisions. So people with disabilities, you know, that they're empowered, people who Roma, people with maybe lack of English, whatever, travelers, you know, that we empower them, we meet them where they're at, and we empower them. So there, I suppose, Ali, the way I would look at it from and putting those in a rural context. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. That's very clearly outlined. And maybe just one, I guess, a theme or a thread that comes from me from what you said is around real, like, resource flow or exchange, you know, because it's whether it's the income that can be gained by those of us that are living rurally, or that sense, as you were pointing to in Justin's story, of actually there are other contributions, other richnesses we can offer that are beyond money. And then also the resource that's coming into our amazing community development workers and centres that is perhaps, ever since our sort of financial crash and the times we've gone through, has maybe not been as ample as it needs for all of our citizens in this area, for all of us in rural areas. So yeah, thank you for bringing in all of these themes to all of you. And I think maybe just to, I'm kind of, my interest is really peaked now, because I know, Justin, you started to touch on some of the things that certainly you were doing, and that is an area that we would like to go into. So maybe just having just set the scene a little and built the context, and I know you started to mention some projects, but what would you say, do you have experiences of what you've done that are kind of going beyond traditional approaches to social inclusion, and different ways of working, new innovations, and maybe you could expand a little on the ones that you started to share with us earlier.
Ironically, I think going back to traditional ways is probably with a new face. I think, for instance, in terms of small farmers, one of the things is that they have been working out of a global model for far too long. And we think that now small farmers are in a better position because of the way COVID and all the way the environment has gone, that they could become key again in restorative agricultural terms. And as an example of that, we have reintroduced the native breeds that had died out almost to small farmers in Achill, working with the Parks and Wildlife, Achill and Erris. And we hope that they're now becoming very economical and prized for their beef, and the fact that they restore biodiversity and they don't have all the inputs of the bigger continental breeds. So I think that's a thing we'll have to work on and set up little farmers co-ops on that. So we're working on that at the moment. And I said the issue of traditional food, we are developing, we had a weekend on the anthropology of food and the community of that. So that can become a big academic interest, and is. And we're working with UCD, they hope to turn it into a master's program. And again, the folklore, I think, is important, because oral history, often people are not asked for their story, and we need to connect to place, and we need to connect to place names, and we need to get a cultural identity for each area, not just bland tourism that comes in and consumes us. We have to get tourism that comes in and enhances us. So if it's the Irish language, they come in to learn that. And we have been teaching that. Emma, that should be doing this talk, has been teaching this online even to people in America. And the interest in the Irish language now is profound, but I think it can be monetized. And we'll be working on things like that.
Wow, Justin. Yeah, thank you. And yes, just to say, Justin's colleague Emma was going to be with us today, and she's ill. But it means instead we're very lucky to have you, Justin. So that's fantastic. But just to echo back in terms of this question around, what are innovative ways, new ways. So I'm really hearing what you're saying. One is, it's not going away from traditional approaches, it's coming back to tradition in a really, it sounds to me like in a really rich and meaningful way, in a way that we need to be doing here in our country. I also just draw out, as you mentioned earlier as well, your partnership with universities is bringing in a kind of much needed leadership and sort of standing and credibility to what you're doing that's needed in our rural areas. So that sounds like something very special as well. And yeah, maybe just again, this, I loved it when you said at the beginning about when you were, or I think maybe this was Emma's project, wasn't it? Asking the older people their stories. It wasn't, what's wrong and do you need some medicine? It's like, we'd love something from you, share something with us. And I just think that sounds so special. So thank you for telling us about those. And I'm sure there's more to hear about as well. Maybe we'll continue in the sort of similar order for now. So just turning to you, Maria. Yes, what in your experience, are there things that we need to be doing differently, or you've been trying differently in terms of social inclusion? Any different new innovations you're experimenting with?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, just to make the point, the resource centre was open in 2017, but unfortunately through COVID, it closed in 2020. So we have contracted physically, unfortunately, but we our aim is to reopen an LGBT resource centre if we get sustainable funding again in Galway City. But we do have an office based in Galway City. But I've fascinating. I was writing down Justin's activities as well, so because I think there's a lot of things that could be shared. So I suppose with COVID, you know, it's brought about an alternative way to access people. You know, so we've maintained that kind of blended approach to the activities that we use. So we would have in-person drop-in sessions, but we'd also every second week we would have it online. So because we're conscious of the fact that some people, again, in rural settings mightn't be able to afford to get into the town, mightn't be fully out, mightn't be comfortable, but that's a comfortable space for them online. But we appreciate that can't be accessible to everyone that may not, you know, have the skills in relation to the online kind of forums. I suppose the activities that we do, conscious of, you know, catering hopefully for our kind of our rural areas, we have intergenerational activities that I think is really rich when we get people from the older generation and the younger generation to come together and share stories or learn about the history. An Irish language group that meets again blended online and in person, and that's really open to people even if they don't have they're fluent Irish or have only a few words, that, you know, to really embrace that. We've a public recognition marker that we launched earlier this year. So it's a really we like it. It's a nice icon of the traditional Irish boats of the area, the Claddagh boats, with the LGBT inclusive flag in the sail, and it's Galliv, and it's for community groups, it's for businesses, it's for public services. They can ask us, request the marker from us, and they can show it on their offices, you know, or their shop fronts. And that visibility is key for people to realise that they can be open in themselves within that service. I think that's really important. And along with that marker, we have like a kind of a resource pack, you know, and we provide training for various different services in relation to cultural competencies in relation to the LGBT plus community. We also had we launched a podcast series, and it touched on the intersectionality between the LGBT plus community and various different groups. For example, people from the LGBT plus community that had disabilities, from the traveling community, that are bilingual, LGBT people in business. But our second series that we're already planning, we mightn't have it funded yet, but we're thinking, and back to Justin, to capture the history of the LGBT plus community from a Galway perspective. You know, because obviously, you know, there are archives in Dublin, but that may be very kind of Dublin centric. that we.
I'm having in the car, just the salmon.
I'll just do some muting.
Yeah. Just to capture the local experience and the local history. You know, we have the longest running Pride, consecutive running Pride in the whole country. And that was when it was illegal and 6 women walked down Shop Street. And now we have several thousand in our last Pride event. So you know, to capture where we were at and where we've come, I think is really important. So yeah, there are a few of the bits, but I'm listening to Justin and Eamon, I'm jotting down other inspirational ideas as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Maria. I really get this, that for me there's this element of that, as you said, the interconnection seems to be a huge part of your work. You know, that you were saying there was a connection, we've got the young and the old, and that's connecting. When we're part of this discussion, you're making connections to what other colleagues here are saying. It just feels like that's such an essence of how you're working to really create inclusive spaces for your community and interconnected with all the wider community circles that are around them. And I also I wish that you find your next centre, if that's the next step for the organisation. That would be, I know that would be an important thing to have. So yeah, maybe we'll continue, and the same question to Eamon, just things that you would share that might be going kind of beyond maybe not, let's say, traditional, but a standard way of doing things, moving into new experiments and innovations. What would you
thanks very much, Ali. Yeah, obviously I mentioned rural transport, and local development companies would have been involved in childcare at the very early stages, but it's one of the, I suppose, the beauties about SciCap is you're allowed, in fairness, to to Bubble in the department, you're allowed to innovate, and social farming is another area there, and I know Paul and his team have visited the social farming and the minister as well. That's really, really positive, and everybody wins in social farming. The farmer wins, as Justin said. They're small farmers. The big industrial farmers probably can't facilitate it, but I think it's a model that can be looked at for other target groups as well. We do it in Kerry around people with disabilities, but they're contributing, they have support, they're making their own decisions. It's all those things that are so positive. They're actually using the rural transport as well, so it's really positive. Laptops over the last number of years as well through our social inclusion, especially with COVID, we rolled those out, a call through the Chamber of Commerce, and then a local businessman adapted or fixed the laptops or wiped them clean. So we've about 60 or 70 laptops out now at the moment, and they're covering all our target groups, for want of a better word of saying it. And especially when the Ukrainians came in as well, they started availing of it, because a lot of them were still linked in with their schools, thankfully, in the Ukraine, so that was really positive. On our prep for the call, Paul mentioned tractor driving as well. So I can never go beyond the meeting without a vision of Paul Geraghty driving up the airport road with a am I right, Paul, a tractor full of or a trailer full of potatoes on the back. So he understood exactly, and I think in fairness to the minister and his team, and they've come out and they have teed up this nicely in terms of content, but also in terms of a challenge to us. So in that tractor driving, we've been trying to bring young people in, maybe between 14 and 16 years of age, who can drive, are allowed to drive, but don't have the skills and don't have the awareness. And maybe, so in fairness to Paul, we've leveraged some funding off him there for that, to roll it out through the whole area. And normally would be done on holidays times, but the schools are now coming back, or the teams are now coming back through South Kerry and IRD Hallow to say we'll actually do it through TY. So when TY are maybe on holidays, but and I suppose it draws them in to activities that community groups like ourselves do. So it's not just about the tractor driving. It's a little bit about what Paul was challenging us there. How can we get maybe more young people involved in our sector as well, and get involved. So when you have them, linked in, other things, as Marie and Justin will say, other things will flow from that. We have Paul mentioned about carers and older people as well. So we have a CSP again under the same department for older people, home maintenance, and along with that we've the senior alert scheme, and we also now have a home visitation scheme that's funded by the HSC as well. So that is both run by the RSS, do the visitation, but also the volunteers as well. So it's there's a couple of thoughts maybe, Ali, that I suppose they're not new things, as Justin said, you're coming with fresh ideas. But one thing I'd say is, in the previous iteration of these programs, before SciCap was SciCap, we used to have a research facility as well at some of the companies. And I think it would be important, I think it would be helpful for the department to have a research capacity on the ground among ourselves, but also to be feeding into what's expected of us at departmental level as well, to help the policymakers, adapt the policy, which in fairness are very, very flexible and very patient with us with. But I think that's just one thing I think that would help with the consultation as well. It's like research in action. Thanks, Ali. Sorry for going on too long now.
No, not at all. Thank you, Eamon. And just to say, maybe just things I'd reflect back from that is, one is, it's great to hear that you, in your experience, that the SciCap program is a field for experimentation, it is welcomed, and Paul is happy to be off down the tractor and make sure he's really got an on the ground knowledge of what's going on. So it's just great to hear that, because I know that's what we're going to need to really keep developing the programs, the interventions, the spaces that we need for all of us in rural areas. So that's heartening to hear that. And then also just your proposal around a research centre. I'm actually associated to a research centre that is funded by one of our departments for exactly that reason, action research on the ground, to really feed into policy in a very kind of a nice sort of flowing cycle. So there is models for that, and I think that's a great innovation. And maybe just saying to all of us who are gathered here, these are the kinds of ideas that we are really welcoming in this fora and beyond. So if there's other ideas like that are being sparked by what Eamon, Maria and Justin are saying, hold them, and we'd like to hear them as we move into the next part of our conversation. conversation after this. So thanks a lot, Eamon. Just to say, maybe just kind of building on what we've been talking about, I'm just going to turn, I've got maybe a few specific things to ask to each of you, but and in this case, just to turn back to you, Justin, there's an interesting point here from Sean Reagan, who's with us in the Fora's just written there, just sort of saying, yes, that sort of honouring this sense of promoting traditional rural culture, but just saying, shouldn't that also be, or in his view, in balance with sort of celebrating diverse cultures? And how would we do that? How do we, really foster our traditional culture, this land, and traveller culture, and our new communities in rural Ireland? And I just wondered, Justin, you spoke quite a lot to going back to the tradition. How would you respond to that in terms of also our new rural communities that now exist in our land?
I think my point is that for people to understand themselves, they have to understand their history. And communities are the construct of their history. So to deal and to interact strongly with new communities, I think it's important that they have a grasp of their own traditions and that. So that's one of the things we will be doing with the Ukrainians that have come in, that will be introducing them to community groups in rural areas and talking about their relative histories and their cultural activities. So one reinforces the other.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I really resonate with that. I hold that view myself, that, to have a strong, warm, good, safe conversation, each group needs to feel grounded in their roots, in their tradition. Yeah. And then we can also, as leaders, hold, warm, inviting spaces where conversations can happen. Yeah. So I think we've touched on, obviously, what's happened in Ukraine, and the fact that many Ukrainians have been forced to come over here, and we've been able to welcome them is a big part of what's, one of the many things we've been dealing with over the last few years. So maybe just looking at that for a moment, that is our reality right now. And for all of our Ukrainian brothers and sisters who are sort of dealing with that, what would you say, we've done the initial welcome and trying to get homes and places to stay for everyone. What are the longer term needs for those communities? How do you see that? This could be, it seems to us, this could be going on for some time. What do we need to do longer term to really lead to full integration for our new fellow citizens into our country?
Well, I think we have to be careful that we don't let them slip back into the concept of a target group. And I think we're encouraging them at the moment to get active in local organizations and stuff like that. But I do think, as Eamon has said, it's crucial that we have an enterprise bit to all this. We have to create enterprises for people to make livings in rural areas. And there's a lot of the Ukrainians asking us, how do they go about setting up businesses? Some of them would have had businesses in Ukraine. And I think that we should be, if we get the department to even allow a pilot TOS or CE scheme, that hasn't, the restrictions have been a year unemployed for these Ukrainians, that we could really help them to develop enterprise ideas and work with the LEOs and the other offices and all these other things. Because if we just create a dependent population, it'll be very dangerous.
Mm. Thank you, Justin. Yeah, absolutely. I get that. They're not just a group that we're trying to take care of. And they were, many of, I'm sure, running their own businesses and so on. And wouldn't it be wonderful to have that creativity be released here and satisfying for them, I'm sure. Any other remarks, Maria? Any reflections on that from your side? I don't know how that's connected to your work.
Yeah, I suppose, again, just the nuances. So as you said, we have the initial welcome, you're welcome here. This is a haven for you from that, traumatic experience that they've had to ripped from their country and their freedom. But again, I suppose, they're not just all one group of people. Within the Ukrainians, they are members of the LGBT plus community. And again, they may not have been out in the country, but they may have. They may feel an additional barrier to be, housed in an area where they don't have any LGBT plus services that they're aware of. So I suppose we would work closely with LGBT Ireland as well. We're working collaboratively with all of the LGBT groups throughout the island, and we did call outs to members of the LGBT plus community that would have capacity to take in members from the LGBT plus community from the Ukrainian refugees, so they had a comfortable, welcome within their whole self again. and to link them up with allies. And we've had a few contact us through our social media wanting to learn about what resources and what social groups that we do have. So we've met with them, we've signposted them to the various different groups that they would have interest in. So it's having that the second layer of support to them. Some of them may have disabilities, they may have particular issues that they need. So knowing the nuances of the needs of that group is really important. So I suppose, yeah, that second layer of support, I think we need to think about.
Okay, right. So the second layer of support, and I mean, I just think it's incredible to think that with the shock of being forced to leave your own country, but in actual fact they're meeting with you, with your organization, like that actually may be a new opening. Maybe it wasn't even possible to come out to participate in the way that they would now, thanks to what you're offering. So, but yes, the next parts of that need to be developed for them. And Eamon, anything you would add on in terms of kind of how we look to supporting and being with our Ukrainian communities going forward?
Not a lot, obviously. We're working very closely with them, and one of our workers, and thanks to Paul and the minister there, we've been able to take on Olya, who's a worker now with us from Ukraine, and she is actually powerful because I suppose from a cultural perspective, as Justin would say, like they're coming from a different culture, so they have to not adapt, but they have to understand, and we should understand, and that sort of helping them access the education system, primary, secondary and third level, is a bit of a minefield for them. So we're working on that. So all those integration and reaching out. But I suppose another way, I'd like to look at it is you have the public service there as well. You have the private sector who are obviously employing them as well, and you have the community. And the community are responding as well, and have responded, as Marie and Justin have said. So it's looking at all those, and there's no sector, one sector responsible. It's all our responsibility to welcome them, and they, as they become more familiar, I'd like Justin's approach that we have to be happy where we're at and understand where they're coming from as well, and understand each other. And I think, going back to the first few points I made around income and contribution, a lot of them want to contribute to our society. It's difficult sometimes because they can be very qualified and their qualifications might not translate directly to ours. And I think we need to maybe to look at that and see how we can make that happen for them. But I suppose one other area I'd just like to say is Robert Carey, our SciCap manager here, put an article into Changing Ireland there about the misinformation and maybe prejudice that can be emerging and surfacing. And we just need to be aware of that. I don't think we should be giving it too much, heightening it too much, because it can fuel the fire a little bit as well. But I think we certainly need to be aware that, look, as Marie said, they're not here of their own choice. And we need to tackle that as it comes up, when it comes up. And it's something we need to be aware of, I think, going forward. Thanks, Ali.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that in, because these things are always, it's always complex. It's a rich, complex, intricate picture. It's not just one mode. And it's great to hear one of the approaches is you have a Ukrainian colleague working with you. So I can see that's really going to help. And then I think you're right, not to give it over energy, but be aware that there can be reactions and so on, and just to attend to that, where we need to. And just kind of, yeah, Maria.
So I just on that point, it makes a very important point, because, social media has brought in a lot of negative things in relation to echo chambers, and people can be in the wrong echo chamber, and they may hear a lot of false news and fake news. We see that a lot, unfortunately, growing, unfortunately, through homophobic comments and transphobic comments and stuff. So I think it's important not to give it air,
yes.
But also to have those conversations with people that may be misinformed, to signpost them to credible resources, and to highlight the fact that there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that about not giving it air, because I think it's almost, that's the way the social media platforms work in a negative way, as they just they fan the flames of this aggressive speech, and that's not, that's not what we stand for in creating a good society. So just sort of weaving in some of the comments coming in, and just Sean again sort of just saying that, and this wasn't an aim for us in this discussion, was to touch on particularly our Ukrainian friends that have come, but as Sean's saying, there's also many other communities equally in need of support. So he was naming Roma, African, Brazilian, Syrian, and my mind was actually also going even to asylum seekers, and that, how limited they are to be able to contribute, which they may love to do, so there's still many challenges to work through. And also an interesting point there, I think that's from Alan Meager, just saying that, it comes back to this thing of what you were saying, Justin, of for people maybe born here, helping them really connect as strongly as possible to their roots beyond this cultural erosion that has happened over the past times. But then that can also help with the fact for a new person coming from outside, from another country, that they also want to really learn what is it to be Irish, how can they ground in Ireland, and that's only going to happen from rooted rural friends and community members that could teach them. So just bringing that in. Oh, and I see Alan's link to this speech from Celeste Rosa that he was referring to. So maybe just continuing on some more specific themes, I wanted to coming back to sort of around the LGBT plus community. And I know, Maria, when we met in the preparation for this, you had started to mention, you did mention the Pride Week and things like that. And so it's just wondering, how does that, I know of Pride, it's a very, very, international sort of massive gathering and festival, but what is the social inclusion impact of that? And particularly in rural areas, small towns, is there more is it working? Is there more that needs to be done? How is that going? And anything you could say to that?
Yeah, so I suppose from outsiders looking in, maybe the parade is the center focal point that people see, but actually for a lot of various communities that celebrate Pride, they pick a particular week. So Pride internationally is the month of June, but I'm sure people are familiar that any weekend in the whole of the summer calendar in Ireland, there would be some rural town having a Pride festival. So that's their own communities, their own families and friends walking through their village or their town, being proud and showcasing that in a really safe, positive way. But in addition to that, many areas, particularly in Galway, so Amach LGBT work closely with Pride Community Group, and it's a week-long festival. So in addition to the Pride Parade, we would hold seminars and talks on specific different items. So there might be a mental health night, there might be a talk about I suppose, safe sex, sexual awareness, consent, and I suppose, it's a space for all of the different groups within the LGBT plus community to come together. So there might be a trans safe space for that group to come together. But as well as the kind of those spaces and those kind of talks and information nights, there's also alternative themed kind of healthy and well-being groups. So there might be a cycling group that will come together, a swimming group would all meet down in Salt Hill and go for a dip in the freezing cold water. We have a Jock Sulis has a soccer group, so it might be a fun five-a-side activity. So I suppose the focus, as I said, is the Pride Parade, and that's really important. But there's layers of celebration throughout that's really important, and it may not be seen or known by the wider community. But it's a really important time for the community to come together in our little kind of separate groups, and then to come together with various different iterations, depending on the needs of the community.
It's interesting. It actually makes me feel that the minister mentioned D Hub in RD, and that is actually my nearest town. And I was going through RD, I don't know what, it was during the summer, and I saw a Pride gathering at D Hub outside, and there were musicians playing, young people, and there were like people that looked like maybe parents or older people there gathered. And I'd actually never seen anyone gathering in the outdoor part and creating a festival atmosphere. And I'm just thinking that is really like, I don't know, it feels very intimate and kind of brave and special. You know, not only was the LGBT plus community creating a festival event that we rarely have in our rural town, I'm afraid, I'd love to, but also to be seen just as a small gathering almost seems more brave than going to a big urban parade where you're amongst thousands. And maybe just, is there anything, Maria, you see that you would, I mean, that already sounds so special, that's happening and it's important. Does it need to be supported further in any ways, or any way you wish to see that develop, any challenges with it, or how do you see that moving next?
Yeah, I suppose like a very important group that we have within Galway is the LGBT plus interagency group. And that has representation from the Education Training Board, the ETBs, City and County Council, Galway Rural Development, Galway City Partnership, the Gardaí, TUSLA, the HSC, you know, so the Youth Work Ireland. So that group comes together maybe once a month, discusses the LGBT plus community, the activities that are there. But like the Family Resource Centres out in Loughrea and Gort are amazing allies. They would adorn their shop front with the LGBT colours and flags and promote events. And we've often done activities in our towns throughout Galway County. And I think that's really important. And you know, if people can take something away, if they don't have an LGBT plus interagency group in their area, why not? And why not start one? Because then if you don't get all of the various groups around the table thinking about LGBT plus services and maybe gaps within your area, then you don't know what's out there or what's not.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maria. Gosh, this is really, I know we're in an ideas forum and partly it's really for the whole assembly to generate ideas, but just thanking you all, our panelists, for these ideas that are coming in our conversation. It's just great to have these, and it stimulates the whole wider conversation. So now just looping back to, we're sort of coming into the final part, but I just want to ask maybe a couple more questions before we draw our conversation as a group to a close. Just back to this, it was your idea on the subject of ideas, Eamon, around kind of the action research and maybe a research centre that is linking your work and then all of our policy and the programmes of the department. And I think there was one example here in the chat. Actually, I can't just see it now. Oh yeah, is it? Anyway, you'll see, everyone can see in the chat, but there was another example of something like that that's being done. Is it around social farming? I think it might have been that one. Yeah, from Brian Smith. But just not to particularly go into that example in detail, but it's great to know that it's happening. But just kind of, I know we opened with me asking what's unique in particular to a rural area that we really need to attend to with social inclusion. And I've been learning about this area, and through kind of, getting to learn from Paul and from the rest of our colleagues as we were developing our forum today, just, that there's such a media focus on issues in urban areas, which will sort of dominate the agenda, dominate the communications agenda, takes the focus away from rural areas. Do you see in each of your work, does that impact on policy making, and how so? What is that? Is there a disbalance there, and how does any impact on a policy making kind of affect what we need in rural areas? So maybe, I can come to you, Justin, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, I think we've been plagued in rural areas by urban models based on critical mass. And it's lack of population and lack of employment that are the issues in the rural areas. Just quickly to Maria's point, I think we're looking very closely through the Davitt Museum of how to make communities inclusive. And we're bringing disabled travellers, etc. in. And I think it's a forum because sometimes museums are defined by rich white folk, and we have left out migrants and all the rest of it. So we've set up a Children's Land League looking at social justice issues in the national schools through the prism of Davitt. And I think it would be a great forum I'll discuss that with you at a later stage, another time, that we could look at that, because the role of a museum in development is a topic I'm pushing very much with the Davitt Museum at the moment. Now back to the other thing, I do think we need a rural model. And going back decades ago, we had action research projects always under the likes of the combat poverty programs. And I think we shouldn't have prescribed templates imposed on us. We need, every area is unique, and we need to approach it with a very open mind. And I will be looking to get an action research program going there in agreement with Paul for these very reasons. We have to reinterpret landscape. We have to reinterpret the land in a post-agricultural society in many ways in the West. And how do we monetize those things and make the place livable? So I do think we should stop funding too many infrastructures and fund people and fund leaders in communities, fund research people that will draw up plans and not presume that we think we know what the problem is, but we should talk more individually to people and listen before we start telling them what's wrong with them or what we can do for them. And we should also put the emphasis on possibility. And if people can survive in those harsh conditions, they must have a great intelligence, as Michael Viney once said in the Times. So I think we want to get a more positive attitude that way. So, but we do need an urban-based social inclusion program that's defined on different lines than just individual poverty.
Do you mean when you said urban-based?
Urban-based is often takes critical mass. There's a load of people unemployed. There's a load of people, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But as Maria has pointed out there, it's very telling. You could lose her group in a depopulated rural area, and they could be left totally isolated. So we have to look at issues of spatial poverty as much as individual poverty.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think what I really, thank you, Justin, for those strong words. And I think what I really take from that first part as well is what you're saying is we don't want one single template. Yeah. We really want is to listen deeply what individual people need, and then to be creating these bespoke responses. And I think that's really been clear in the projects and the work that you've been doing, that you've taken that approach, and that can inspire the rest of us. And I think in each of your works, so for the three of you. So thank you, Justin. Maybe turning to you, Eamon, just to sort of change the order a bit. What's this kind of question of the focus on urban, and then how that affects policy in terms of what we need in rural areas?
I don't think I can add much to what Justin is saying there. I think he's 100% right, and a lot more experienced probably than I am, and not going by age, because I'd be accused of discrimination there, Justin, wouldn't I? But I'd like to just maybe two other points, because they've been mentioned in the chat as well. On the Roma community, we had a particular work with them through TIRC, the Tralee International Resource Centre, who are alongside us here in Tralee. And we were finding it hard to engage with them. But what one of our CE workers at the time, but he's actually fully employed, was now under a social enterprise migrant integration program. We just did a simple preschool introduction form in both English and Roma for especially the women and children, the Roma community. And now they're much more engaged. So it was about going out, seeing what their needs were, as Justin and Maria have said, and responding to those needs. I suppose the other thing I'd like to give an example to is what Minister O'Brien said, the revamped furniture recycling project. That came out of, back in 2005, the traveller community in Castle Island were going through particular issues, and there'd been a number of suicides and all that, and they asked us to be involved in a couple of meetings with other agencies. And what came out of it was there was a huge boxing tradition in Castle Island for the whole community. Mm-hmm. So within 6 months, we'd set up a boxing club, and that is still going. It's fully inclusive. I mean, we have women champion boxers representing Ireland. We have one of our boxers, not we, they have one of their boxers turning professional very, very shortly. People who don't want to compete can do their boxer size. So it's fully inclusive. And the travellers were very clear in Castle Island. They wanted to set up for everybody, not just for the travellers, that they didn't want it, specific. And the same then, revamp came out, the furniture recycling project. They wanted real employment to contribute to their community. And just over the last number of years, we've changed the premises from an industrial estate into the middle of town, into a market house in town. And from an inclusion point of view, that was after research. So the first one was just purely building on the culture of boxing and sport. I think sport is a massive, innovative way of accessing young people, and it doesn't have to be sport in the traditional sense. Any physical activity, as Marie said there, could be soccer, could be swimming, could be doing whatever, going for a walk. But then on the social enterprise side, we needed a bit more research, and we looked at that and eventually got a social enterprise community services program. And again, it's integrated. Travellers and other people are involved in running that business. But when we moved it to the main street, it was an eye-opener for me to say people were now working on the main street in their local town, and it made so much of a difference, rather than, we didn't think anything about having the workshop outside town, but now that it's in town, hopefully God, we'll never have to leave it, you know what I mean, as such. So just a couple of examples of meeting people where they're at, being available to them, listening to them, and then responding as best we can. And obviously the policymakers and the decision makers in the departments were very good in supporting our project in that as well, our projects. So thanks, Ali.
Thank you, Eamon. Wow, what brilliant examples. And I think just the way it unfolded, that it seems to build on also what I was taking from you, Maria, this constant interconnections. We're not wanting to deal with little siloed separate groups. It's actually interwoven, and now finally with that project coming right into the heart of town, it's just a wonderful story, and I can see that's the kind of work we really want to be doing. So maybe just turning to you, Maria, for that final question, just around anything from the sort of the urban to the rural and how that affects policy making.
Yeah, no, look, I reiterate what Justin and Eamon says, one size does not fit all, and don't want to diss our capital. It's fantastic. But, there's very different needs. If you do needs analysis in Dublin, it's not going to reflect North Mayo or Kerry or East Galway. So I suppose, even within us, so within this small charity in Galway City, there's not one size fits all that we apply to the various sections of our community. So speaking about maybe, so a traveller woman in the community who is, wants, to access the service or to talk about their sexuality, an evening session is not going to work for that person because she probably is home minding her kids and she doesn't have childcare. So having day sessions for that particular person, so you have to think about who you're servicing. And really, refine the needs, and the service needs to reflect that. So I suppose what we say to policymakers in Dublin, that they really need to have a different lens when they're looking at the rural aspects of what needs to be done there. Because I suppose there's been a resource centre in Dublin and in Cork for a number of decades. So all we're asking for is parity. Like, we're quite a large city, but we do have a massive rural population throughout the county and the various neighbouring counties. So, and we are incredibly conscious that we need to support those in the rural areas. So and that's something that we need to improve upon. But we need the resources to do so. So our ask is always to think of us as an urban centre, but catering for a significant rural setting.
That's clear. Thank you so much, Maria. And yes, as you say, it's really a common thread that's weaving through what all three of you shared. And I love that when you said, don't look at through this one lens. And I was thinking even maybe put the lens down and come back with the listening ears, which really draw out the uniqueness and the interwovenness of each of our fellow citizens, particularly in rural areas, and what each of our unique needs are. And that actually it can be a very creative act and an enriching act to respond to that. And I think that's really come out in each of your stories in telling us about the projects and the long-standing work that you're doing and the kind of sense of possibilities of what more there is to come. So with that, I'd like to bring our conversation to a close and to just thank really warmly Justin Salmon from Mayo North East, Eamon O'Reilly and Maria Malloy for really just sharing with us your work, sparking our conversation and our ideas, and helping us really continue to develop what we're doing in our rural areas to keep everyone included in our communities going forward. So thank you to all three of you.
Thank you.
Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thanks very much, Ali. And listen, thanks for your very, very sort of consummate facilitation this morning. It was really, really excellent to keep the thing moving. And thanks to Gareth, Melissa and Bernie and all the team there. And of course, the Minister for coming today, and to all of the panelists, Eamon, Justin and Maria, and all of the contributors and participants. It's been a really fascinating discussion. And I'm going to be very brief because I know the Minister would like to wrap up here. I'm sure he's delighted with the campaign for his kind of, for him to remain here has started in Cavan in earnest. And he'll be thanking Terry for that. But look, a few takeaways I've kind of been jotting down as the day has been moving on. Lots of people mentioned stories, and it's a really interesting concept, I think. I mean, Maria mentioned, you know, people coming into their centre in Galway with the stories, you know, of coming out in rural Ireland and the difficulties around that. And Justin and Emma collecting folklore and stories around the Mullet Peninsula and beyond. There's something about that. There's something about the importance of story, and it feeds into everything we're talking about today: the Ukrainian story, our own stories, and how we can kind of make it all work together. Something around the messaging as well, and the prejudice that got mentioned, and not to give that any oxygen. And at the same time, there's a need to get ahead of that as well and get the positivity out there as well. Strikes me as well that through COVID and through the Ukrainian issues, there's been a tremendous spirit in local communities. You know, statutories, non-statutories, local authorities and local development companies, and everybody working, you know, hand in hand to turn to face the crisis. And I know we've seen that in the community call for COVID and the Ukraine response for it as well. It's really, really heartening, and there's a way to capture that and to kind of, you know, keep that momentum moving, and apply it to other issues maybe that we need to tackle from a community development point of view. We're really hearing the idea that there's not a single template to solve the issues of urban and rural exclusion in Ireland. We're hearing that. We're working with you through that. And some of the ideas here today are proof that there's many, many different ways to approach and tackle these issues. And look, the uniqueness of rural Ireland and the uniqueness of the different spots within rural Ireland, again, that point is not lost on us. So I just want to thank everybody for everything that came through in the chat. We'll absolutely, our commitment to you is that that will be part of the mix as we're designing the next iteration of SciCap, and we'll make sure that it's as effective. We'll try to make sure that it's as effective for rural communities as it is for urban communities. So listen, I thanks again for all of the brilliant ideas, and I'm going to hand you back to Ali now just to close it off with the Minister. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Paul. It's really heartening to get your closing words, and what you reiterated there, that absolutely resonates as the threads that we heard today. And thank you for leading this, for developing these programs that sound like they create a space for so much innovation to happen. So yes, as we said, delighted, Minister Brown, you're with us still, and I know you've been there part of everything that's been happening in the room today. So I will just turn back to you to close our forum today, and whatever remarks you would like to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali, and I'll keep it very brief. The main thing that strikes me after the session is that, you know, there's still a future for online. I think we all had kind of got tired of online, but actually this has been one of the richest and most interesting online discussions I've been at since the whole online situation began. And I think partly, Ali, that's credit to you, but also credit to the panelists at the start as well, that really were creative and interesting and different perspectives. And I think it really set the tone for the whole session. So that was one of the best sessions I've been part of. So thank you for all for your contributions to it. There was a couple of things that stood out to me even before you started to do wrap up. The mention of intergenerational projects, and I'll mention it again, and I had it noted down before you started to do wrap up. It really strikes me as, particularly on the rural side of things, that it could be something that, you know, we could and should do more on. The research function for SciCap providers as well was an interesting one. I know we do a little bit with Pubble, but I think that's an interesting idea to pursue as well. I spotted in the chat as well this idea of farmers' yards, where farmers come together in the local marts as well. An idea I hadn't heard of before, but really interesting one as well. And I do want to just take the opportunity as well, just to give credit to the response on the Ukraine side of things this year as well. It's really, look, I know you've been thanked and in numerous ways by numerous people, but I don't think we can do it too much. It does come across very strongly again today as well, the efforts and the achievement that's been done this year alone, you know. Heartening to hear a sort of an awareness of the dangers of social media as well, and I suppose an awareness of where to put it in the larger context as well, because it is a challenge for us all at community level as well. And some interesting points there in relation to sort of outreach that was done with Roma children that I kind of noted as well. I was paying particular attention to the answers to the two big questions. And I think a lot of the answers to the initial question in relation to the challenges for a socially inclusive Ireland, you could have probably predicted 60, 70% of them ahead of time, which is interesting in that we've got a fair idea what the challenges are. I suppose what was interesting from today was that the new ideas about how to address them and the new ways and the opportunities that we have as well. Ali, I'll definitely be looking for a copy of the answers to the SciCap question, but I think there was a clear message there in terms of flexibility and responsiveness that's needed in the new program as well. So that's heard loud and clear. And thanks, Terry, for the vote of confidence. I would very much like to stay in my brief just to put that on the record as well. But look, just to wrap up, thank you everyone. That was a really interesting, useful and rich session. So appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.